I'm Professor Ramesh Gaur from India, the moderator of this session. I extend a very hearty welcome to all of you on day 2 of ETD, USETD 2025 conference. We are going to have a workshop 2 very soon, which is on artificial intelligence facilitated literature review, a hands-on demonstration of Elicit. You all know that Elicit is a artificial free research assistant. And when we talk about research, literature review comes one of the first steps and most important steps. So Kristin, Terrill, and Lily Compton will be taking over you to next 2.5 hours. We'll be having some time for discussion, and they plan to have engage you during the session also. My request to all of you, please keep your mic muted. Whatever questions or clarification you have, put in the chat box. It will be convenient for you as well as others. And also keep it in mind that we'll be having a dedicated question answer session in the end of the workshop. So let me just invite Kristin, Terrill to take over this workshop. And in between, I will try to have some more conversation with you. Thank you very much. Over to you, Kristin.
Thanks, Ramesh. Anybody who can't hear me, just type in the chat. Kristin, we can't hear you. Meanwhile, I will start sharing. Okay, so this is our demonstration of Elicit.
Then can you change it to? Can you change it? Oh, yeah, it changed.
It's on the slide.
Yeah, it's on.
Thanks, Lily. Okay, this is our literature review workshop, AI facilitated literature review workshop. This is a project that has been under development for over a year. And it's a workshop that we have now piloted at our university twice and ran the final version of this workshop, which is the one I'm doing today, already once last spring, and we're going to give it again at our university this fall. It's been very popular. We've gotten so many students, staff, and faculty signing up for this workshop. And we get a lot of questions from students, staff, and faculty when we're not doing the workshop to just ask us, you know, what is the status of artificial intelligence with thesis and dissertations? What is the graduate college doing to set boundaries, and what are the rules and what's allowed and what's not? And so being able to have developed this workshop and done the background work of understanding what are the strengths and weaknesses of these technologies and what do people need to know in order to use them responsibly has been very useful in starting to field those questions. So our university still doesn't have, I would say, very strict answers to questions like that for faculty and students. The graduate college hasn't set specific policies related to artificial intelligence. And so what we do when those questions come our way is try to interpret those cases in light of other resources that are available through our institution and in light of what we've learned in preparation for this workshop. So let's go ahead and move forward. I'm going to start the workshop with a hands-on exercise because I realize that it's early for some of us. It's the first workshop of the day, and I think it's fun to use AI tools. So the first workshop activity today is going to just be playing with a chatbot. So I would ask you to find yourself a generic chatbot, something like ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini, or Microsoft Copilot. I think a really easy way to access one of these generic chatbots is just to open the browser to the browser homepage. The popular browsers like Google Chrome and Microsoft Edge are very eagerly trying to let you know that they have AI tools and chatbots that you can use, and they'll usually have a link to it on the like generic first page of any browser that you might open. So the prompt that I'm suggesting you use is give the admission rates for universities in the state of Iowa, or if you prefer, your home state or the state that you're working out of. So this is the same activity that we run in our graduate student workshop, and it's academically oriented, and it's sort of a complex question that probably you don't know the correct answer to offhand. So I'll walk through this along with you. I like Edge, the Microsoft browser, because I use a lot of Microsoft products. So I feel like this is my browser. But if you're using Google Chrome, try it with Gemini, and we'll talk about what you get. So what are the admission rates for colleges in Iowa? Now, some of you who are more sophisticated AI users might be looking at this prompt and recognizing that there's a lot of prompting strategies that are not in play with this prompt. Things like assigning it some kind of point of view to inhabit while it's using the prompt, or giving a lot of details like undergraduate admission rates for Regents colleges in Iowa based on data from the year 2022 to 2024. Those kinds of details usually do improve the results, but let's just take a look at the kind of answer that you get if you give it a very, bland, bare bones prompt. So you can see this is what I got. A summary of college admission rates in Iowa. There's, overall statistics. It's still generating the answer. It hasn't completely answered the question yet. So there's like overall admission statistics, total applicants, total admitted. These little boxes here are links out to other websites that presumably are not AI generated answers. Of course, you'd have to go click on them to find out what's the source material behind those. But what these chatbots have been doing lately is they'll give you links out to other resources, because I think the developers have started to realize people really don't trust the chatbot answers. We know that they can be inaccurate. And so the generic chatbots like Copilot now reinforce the answers by also sending you links to other websites that may reinforce the information that they present in the answer. So it says, yeah, some colleges have 100% accepting rates, like Western Iowa Tech, Allen College, Briarcliff. So it's like naming colleges. The most selective colleges in Iowa, it says, are Grinnell and Loris. I've never heard of that college. I haven't lived in Iowa forever, so I'm not saying it's a hallucination. I just am not familiar with it. So
Kristin, I am having the participants just kind of paste what they get using which
oh wow,
specific
okay.
ones. So in the chat, people are typing some for their own states, and then they're discovering that some are missing. And then we're also seeing those who are actually searching the Iowa ones. The links are different. Some are getting big future, others is just generic numbers with no links. So a variety of responses.
Okay, so this is the key takeaway. The answer that you get from a chatbot is not going to be consistent, even if we all use the same prompt. This graphic here on the slide is a response that we got to this prompt I guess last probably March when we were preparing the slide for presentation to the graduate students. Some things that you can take note of is, I think, did anybody get anything that wasn't text? Anything other than writing?
Danny got a table.
Oh, you got a table? Okay. Oh, neat. Okay. Okay. So the text answers are like the cheapest. They take the least amount of computation and processing. So typically, if you give it a prompt and you don't specify that you want it to be in some specific mode, like visual mode, it will probably give you a text back. Let's do another prompt. So let's ask it to do a bar chart. So I'm going to say a bar chart for the admission rates for the universities in the state of Iowa. And I think I'm going to continue in the same chat. So in this interface, I'm just going to, sorry, let me make sure I'm actually sharing. I'm not going to start a new prompt. I'm going to just keep going with the same chat. I'm going to say provide a bar chart to visualize admission rates. Again, I'm not trying to give it a really specific prompt, but just know if you're wanting to get better results from something like a generic chatbot, giving more precision in your prompt is known to give more accurate and more precise answers. Okay, so it did give me a bar chart. And it listed the same colleges that it had listed in the text that I was looking at before. So that's what another thing that can help is having your prompts go in the same conversation, because as we'll learn later, this chatbot is reviewing the whole chat when you enter a prompt. So it's not just saying, okay, I'm going to look at the last thing that the user typed to me and then prepare a new answer. It looks at the whole context. So some of you may have heard the expression context window. I'm not going to talk about that in the slideshow today, but the idea of a context window is everything so far in this conversation. And this bar chart, actually, if you critique it, does look pretty accurate. So it's got a y-axis that goes from 0 to 100, and then all of the bars that actually should be 100 are that tall, and the 14.5 and the 18.5 are proportionally tall. So this is looking like a pretty good bar chart. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I think happens under the hood when you ask for something like this. Go ahead and start chatting about what you all experienced when you asked it to prepare a bar chart.
I posted mine and it only limited mine to 3 of the main public institutions in Iowa.
Okay. Yeah, and it looks again like actually a pretty well-designed bar graph. It's not just off the wall bar lengths that make no sense in the context. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of bar charts show up. Oh, no bar chart. I got Python code. Liz, thanks for typing that. You got GW, you got data in a table structure with generic instructions for how to make a chart. Okay, go make one yourself, is what that chatbot said. Sometimes you might get some off-the-wall responses. And then there's more Python code. So what is happening, and what I think is really interesting, is that when you ask it to make a bar chart, some of the chatbots are now sophisticated enough to not just try to figure out what a bar chart is and generate an image of the bar chart, but what they will often do now is they will say, okay, I can't generate an image like that based on the image generation technology, which is pretty good for simulating a photograph or a drawing. But if you're talking about a data visualization, guessing what that picture is going to look like based on what other pictures look like is not the best strategy. The best strategy that a chatbot can have is actually to do what a human would do, which is plug that into Excel or maybe a Python code or an R code, and use those code technologies to generate a bar graph. And then that's usually what it gives you. And so that's what it gave here too. This is a really sophisticated thing that the chatbots are doing behind the scenes. And if you remember back in 2022 or 2023, shortly after ChatGPT was made available to the public on the web, there was a lot of discourse going on about how awful the data visualizations and any kind of scientific graphics were looking. And that's because those old versions of the chatbots just were like, oh, you want a picture? Okay, here's a picture of a bar chart. This is what bar charts look like. But it didn't have the sophistication to think like what a bar chart means or what it represents in terms of data. The current ones are getting much better, and they've got these hidden steps in the background where you say, I want a bar chart, and that chatbot is thinking through and saying, I shouldn't say think, but I anthropomorphize the chatbots. Just cautionary admission right now, this is going to be happening throughout the rest of the conversation. It's going to think, okay, it probably doesn't want just a picture of a bar chart. It probably wants a visualization of data, and then it will process data that it finds on the web and plug that into some kind of a code that it can write. So that's pretty sophisticated and pretty cool. Sometimes it doesn't get all the way there. So like GW you saw and Liz you saw, sometimes it'll be like, well, here's the data, you can make your own bar chart, go do it in Excel, or here's some Python code, you can run it in your computer. If you're not adept at those things, that's less helpful. But that it gives you a sense of what's going on behind the scenes. Now let's try something a little different. Let's try to do something like a Venn diagram. So this prompt is give 3 overlapping charts showing the connections among AI, GenAI, and large language models. So let's try this one. And you can, if you don't want to do this prompt, you can do another Venn diagram that makes more sense for you. I'm going to start a new chat for this one because I think that I don't want to confuse it with my college admission conversation. So let's see. Here's the new chat button. I think it might be blocked by my Zoom graphics. Yeah, my new chat button is right up here in purple. Okay, let's see how it does with this prompt. Provide a graph of overlapping circles depicting the difference between AI, Gen AI, and LLMs. Let's see how it does. I haven't done this prompt in a while. So it's starting off with a text answer. Okay, and now it gave me a Venn diagram. So this does look like a Venn diagram. It's got 3 circles that overlap. It's done some really nice shading here to show the overlap areas and that they're different. I will say the data that it's presenting makes no sense to me at all. It says AI is 50, AI overlapping with Gen AI is 20. and GenAI alone is 30, this makes no sense to me. I don't know what it's trying to do here. I don't think that the AI knows what it's trying to do. So then it has this breakdown of what they are. The text breakdown actually makes a lot of sense, but it's not reflected in any way in the Venn diagram. So how did you all do? How did your Venn diagrams look? Okay, wow. So it looks like a lot of the Venn diagrams look a lot like mine with even the color overlaps looking the same. And actually one here, Lucas, the Venn diagram that you generated actually does have meaningful written text in the circle, not just numbers that we can't parse at all. So this is a little bit different. And if you think through what you would do if maybe you were trying to visualize something in a Venn diagram, if you were to go to Excel to visualize that, you probably wouldn't use a graph generator. This is the one that we were able to generate in last spring. So you can see the generative Venn diagram algorithm is improving quite a lot, but it still doesn't exactly know what to do with a Venn diagram. Because that's not something that you can, it's not easy to do in like a Python code or write some software to generate a Venn diagram. That requires a lot more interpretive work, understanding conceptually what these circles in the Venn diagram mean to the audience. That right now still really seems to be outside of the ability of an AI. So these exercises are meant to be fun. It's also meant to help students understand that, like, you don't have to be a computer scientist to use generative AI. It's not, it's very accessible to use, but also it's pretty limited, and its capabilities differ depending on the kind of task you're trying to get it to do. So from here, we can start to move into some of the learning objectives that we have for this workshop, which have to do with AI literacy. And really, this concept of AI literacy is emerging. It's pretty controversial. Some people dispute that AI literacy is distinct from other kinds of computer literacies like digital literacy or information literacy. I think that AI is unique enough in its abilities to warrant having its own category of literacy, just because we do know that it's different from other computer applications in some very key ways that make it harder to interpret the outputs. So there are quite a few studies that are saying AI literacy is important to teach. AI will create job opportunities, but it will also potentially replace some workers and change the shape of workplaces. So it's important that anybody who's concerned about shaping their career understand, if not how they're individually going to use AI, understand that it is present and that it's going to influence their workplace. There's estimates about the extent of this. So some say 15% of working hours will be automated. 47% of jobs will be at high risk of automation. I'm not an economist. I don't really have the ability to critique these numbers, but this is an area of great concern to people who study the workforce and economics. It could impact on women more profoundly because 160 million women worldwide, I think this is still according to the MICA 2017 report may need to transition between occupations, going from lower skilled into higher skilled roles. And AI literacy has the potential to play into that transition. So it is important to consider AI literacy as an important learning outcome during this, transition into AI becoming more relevant in the workplace. My colleagues and I looked at quite a few articles that were exploring the idea of AI literacy. And this is our way of simplifying the ideas that are presented in those articles. We see 3 areas of AI literacy that we can sort of synthesize down to. The first one is algorithmic awareness. It's important if somebody's using AI or in some way interacting with an output of AI, like a search engine result, to be aware of the way that these algorithms work, because that helps us be critical evaluators of their outputs. And then that leads into evaluative judgment. Be able to make a judgment about how reliable you think it is or how useful you think it is, and then plan accordingly. And then lastly, we do think it's important to have procedural competence so that, if and when AI is in use, you're using it in a way that is going to get you the outputs that you want. So these 3 overlap and they fit together, and that's what this workshop is pointing at. We added some little icons to each element of AI literacy, and those will appear throughout the slideshow. So if you see one of those icons at the top right of the slide, that is the targeted learning outcome for that slide. And this quote synthesizes the idea. So it says, AI literacy is a set of competencies that enables an individual to critically evaluate, communicate, and collaborate with AI, and to use AI effectively and ethically. And that is sourced from 2 papers, one from 2020, one from 2025. So this diagram is about algorithmic awareness. And this is our very high level, very simplified idea of what the large language model algorithms or the generative AI algorithms are doing. So it is a type of artificial intelligence. And I saw in the chat, there was a comment that, AI is kind of a euphemism or maybe a sort of marketing term. It is a term that has been in use for, I want to say, like maybe over 70 years, and it refers to lots and lots of different kinds of things that computers can do. It's been used to describe things that we now perceive as very basic computing. So this is not a term that has a very specific meaning in computational studies, but it is the term that we're using sort of in everyday language. And in our everyday language in 2025, it usually has something to do with generative AI. So this is a type of artificial intelligence that can create any kind of new content, especially texts, images, and videos, and computer code. How they work is 2 things. They've got training data as an input, and they've also got user input. So the training data is the sort of billions of words or billions of image files that we hear about, these like massive data sets that are probably unstructured. Maybe there's some kind of metadata provided to the algorithm, but in some cases there's not very much metadata provided. And that training data is one of the inputs. And then the user input, which we call a prompt, and sometimes user input may be in another form other than a prompt, but there's some kind of user input, and both of those together go into some kind of algorithm. This depiction of an algorithm is a neural network. There's other kinds of algorithms, but the generative AI are typically using something like a neural network. I'm not going to get any deeper than that. And the output for the generative AIs it is important to understand that those are a prediction based on statistical probability. What's different about these AIs from other kinds of digital tools is that the user input that goes into the algorithm isn't always going to get the same output. Because it's a prediction based on statistical probability, that output isn't going to be the same every time. And that is what I think makes generative AI very different and very interesting compared to other kinds of software that we're more used to. What differentiates a large language model? It's a kind of algorithm that enables computers to interact using natural language, enabling the generation of text, code, and images. Large language models alone are not quite enough to get you to a chatbot like ChatGPT or Copilot. But the large language model is sort of the secret ingredient that makes it feel like you're engaging with some thinking being. And part of that is because you can input natural language. That's the other difference between the generative AI technologies and other softwares that we've been used to. So think about yesterday, we were learning about, like, in the standard literature review, in the past, we've had to do a lot of teaching with students about how to, like, use specific keywords to optimize your search results or Boolean searches. In the past, if you wanted a software to work properly, it was very important to speak its language and to give it inputs that it could easily process. And those had to be pretty structured and pretty predictable. And otherwise you'd get like garbage in, garbage out, right? It would just say, I can't deal with this. I have no idea what you're talking about. If you have a tool like a large language model that enables users to input natural language, like a question, hey, where should I go to find something I need? And it outputs something pretty reasonable. That's a complete departure from software that we've been used to before, and especially when it's powerful enough to combine with other AI tools to generate code and images. That allows it to do things that really feel completely different from what we've ever had before in the past. How do LLMs work? They're predictive, and they predict based on the likelihood of some sentence coming together. So for text, if you type the sun rises in the, and that's your prompt, it would predict the next word based on patterns that it's learned from vast amounts of text. So it's looking at every time a pattern like this has ever appeared in the training data, and then it's making some kind of prediction of, well, what's most likely going to be the next word. So it might say east, if that's the most common completion. And then, like we were talking about earlier, if given more context, it might give a different answer. So if you said in the winter, if you added more words to the input, in the winter, the sun rises later in the, and then it might predict morning. And then, so this is how context sort of changes it. And then another thing that we've kind of mentioned before is you might type the sun rises in one chat and it would come back with east. You might put that exact same prompt in another chat, starting all over again, and it might say morning. So it's not going to give you the same output every time because it is a statistical prediction, and things don't always happen the same way, even if both of those answers are highly likely. Now, another thing to be aware of, and that I think it's important students be aware of, especially if you're using a specialized tool like Elicit, is that there are open and closed AI models. And the difference between those is the training data. So with a closed model, the code architecture and training data are available only within the developer organization. They are hidden, they're like trade secrets. Whereas with open, the code architecture and training data are publicly accessible. Once these architectures and training data became increasingly sophisticated and much larger, like infinitely larger, they started closing them up because once it became potentially more commercially interesting. I think the companies were like, okay, we're going to take off our scientist hats and put on our business people hats, because now we can actually do things that are very difficult to do and have never been done before. And so you saw open models like BERT suddenly get slammed shut with the GPT 3.4 or 3.5, 4.0, and so forth. There's also important distinctions between training data types. There are general data training sets and specialized training data sets. The general a good example of that would be the World Wide Web. So famously, the GPT large language models, they call it the generative pre-trained transformer, are open models. They just scraped the entire internet and then made that the training data. Other models are trained on specialized data sets. And you can even train large language models that have a general data set. You can specifically train it using a specialized data set like an organizational database. And that's actually not incredibly hard to do. You can give it a database and say, only pull answers from this database. It doesn't work perfectly, but it is possible to do. So you can add to the training data even on a already built general model. If you're using a model that has a general data set, it may not be able to give you the answer that would make sense in a very specialized context, because it's pulling a prediction based on statistical probability. And the statistical probability of one answer in the general data set might be completely different from the answer that it would be within a specialized data set. All right, let's get back to real life here, outside of the algorithm, into the world that we inhabit. We're talking about the work that we do with graduate students, and graduate students occupy many roles in their lives as graduate students. They are students, of course. As students, they engage in classroom learning, graduate coursework, and they do homework and course papers. This is probably the area that has received the most attention with respect to AI and generative AI, is the student work. Now, graduate students are also teaching assistants. They do classroom teaching and they do grading and assessment. So on the one hand, they're students who might be using AI or be tempted to use AI or thinking about it for their coursework. Meanwhile, they could also be teaching assistants who might be worried that their students are using AI or GenAI in their coursework and trying to figure out how to grade it. Graduate students are also researchers. They engage in data collection, data analysis, and interpretation of findings. All of those things could potentially be done in some way with generative AI. And they're also scholars who write and edit. They do literature review and synthesis, and they worry about publishing and copyright. So you can start to see how graduate students, when they think about AI, they have to think about it from a lot of different perspectives. And their attitudes toward AI and GenAI might shift depending on what role they're inhabiting and what tasks they're trying to do and how AI might impact on those tasks. This, to me, gives a very strong rationale for teaching AI literacy at the graduate level. Because if you only teach it to somebody in their role as a student and only worry about things like classroom learning, graduate coursework, and homework and course papers, you're missing out on the other roles that graduate students inhabit, where it's really important to understand about generative AI. And the thing that we worry about the most when we're teaching AI literacy is obviously its limitations. And I'll talk a little bit about some of their limitations, and this has to do with evaluative judgment, teaching them how to understand the limitations and then later interpret them in the context of their various roles. So the big limitations of generative AI, these are not the only ones. There's other limitations that are important, but they're not going to be focused on in this presentation, are bias, the quality of the training data, data privacy, and hallucination. These all have really important implications for graduate students in their various roles. Just to clarify, when I say hallucination, what that refers to is inaccurate outputs. It's sort of a term that's been used in common parlance and in some technical papers to refer to anything that these algorithms output that is false. They call that hallucination. Hallucination can also refer to things that are ridiculous or off the wall, but mainly it has to do with inaccuracy. So let's talk about bias. So in the context of artificial intelligence, the concept of bias refers to any inclination that AI-generated responses or recommendations could unfairly favor or go against one person or group. That's the social AI bias. This has to do with bias in the training data. So of course, the algorithms are influenced by their training data, which is in turn pulling from sources that maybe we can see, maybe we can't see, but there's going to be some kind of bias in those sources. If you're talking about a giant data set from the World Wide Web, what most people raise concerns about are bias against minority groups, minority language groups, women, and those kinds of identity-based biases. They are stemming from gaps in the training data. So the quality of generative AI models depends on the quality of the training data. If you're pulling the entire web, you may not be getting data that reflects your values, but it's big enough to train it to be very coherent. And so there's a trade-off there. The more data you have, the more coherent your model is, but also the more disgusting it might be. Factual errors, unbalanced information sources, or again, biases embedded in the training data. It says may be reflected in the output of the model. They are reflected in the output of the model. They define the output of the model. So how can we determine the appropriateness of AI use in certain tasks, knowing that it has the limitation of bias? Well, you need to be able to describe the bias, understand in what direction it may be biased, drawing from everything you know about the training data and the way the algorithm works. And this tool is something that we developed to break down the impact of that limitation, the bias limitation, in 3 categories, whether that impacts on its effectiveness, its efficiency, or whether it's ethical. So you have to be able to articulate, well, what's my application here? What am I using it for? And if I know that it has this limitation of bias, how is that going to impact on if it's effective for that application, if it's efficient, or if it's ethical? The table here is divided into 4 columns, and the right 3 columns are recommendations of in what way to use the AI tool. So the first column to the left is researcher only, just don't use AI. If it's not capable of being effective, then you need to do something else, don't use AI. If it is capable of sub-processes, maybe you could go into the middle column here, researcher and AI, oversee what the AI is doing and guard it, or just take over where it can't be effective. And then if the AI is more capable than the human, even in light of its biases, that is evidence that you can just take your hands off the wheel and say, okay, go ahead, AI enabled. And then similarly, the second row is efficiency. If it consumes more resources than the human, that's a reason why you might not use it, just do researcher only. If resource optimization is possible, again, maybe you can trade the work or oversee it in some way, then that would be a case for researcher plus AI. And then if the AI consumes fewer resources than the human, it could be AI enabled. Now, this row uses the word resources strategically. It doesn't specify which resources. That is up to the user of this tool to determine what resources they think are most important to focus on. An obvious resource that graduate students may feel like they lack is time. So if the AI is faster, it's consuming fewer time resources than the human. That could point to AI enabled. However, a lot of people, and I understand where this comes from, point out that AI developers are consuming a huge amount of resources in terms of especially like water and electricity that are far greater than the natural resources that a human thinking with their brain would ever consume. And so if you're making a decision using this tool, when you're talking about efficiency, it is worthwhile to specify which resources am I focusing on and what are my values here. And then similarly in the last row, the ethical row, there are some guidelines that designate whether it's researcher only, a combination, or AI enabled, but it's up to the person who's using this tool to evaluate their task to still be responsible for understanding their own ethical values. So if you are in a situation where AI use is explicitly prohibited, it would be unethical to use it. Or if the limitations cause harm, such as bias, hallucination, or similarity, if they cause harm, again, it's going to be unethical to use it. Or if the AI use engenders collateral harm. To me, this is the case where maybe you're not hiring a grad assistant and maybe using your research funds for something else because you decided to use AI. That would cause collateral harm to a student who could have had that assistantship. So if somebody's losing a job because of your AI use, I personally would consider that collateral harm and would consider that an ethical threat. A researcher plus AI case might involve if human in the loop or human oversight is AI use is explicitly permitted, so it's not forbidden, then you could say, yeah, that's researcher plus AI. And if human oversight can mitigate harm, that would also potentially rationalize using AI. AI enabled would be ethical only if it's explicitly permitted and the limitations don't cause direct or collateral harm. So these are some of our guidelines that we've started to use and apply when we're thinking about AI. We tried to design this tool to be very flexible to different scenarios, including the student scenario, the teaching assistant scenario, the researcher, and the scholar scenario. So in light of that, we get to, in our workshop, this workshop is split over 2 days. We're about 48 minutes into the workshop today, so we're doing well on time, but this would actually be the second 90-minute portion of our workshop, and we would hold it on another day to give everybody sort of a chance to process their AI literacy knowledge and get ready for applying it in a literature review process. So given this opportunity for a break, why don't we take a look at the chat? And Lily, have there been any questions that I need to address?
No questions. I would want to highlight that I did put the 3E framework link in the chat so people
Nice.
can download that framework, and it's licensed with a Creative Commons, so you are free to integrate it anywhere you wish. Are there any questions for Kristin at this point?
Have you checked the chat box? I don't think there is any question, but we can, are you done with your presentation or?
No, this is just leading into the literature review part of the
We
presentation.
would like to be open this for question answer.
Briefly, only for the first part, and then Kristin will move into the hands-on with Elicit next.
So now it's open for you to have any questions, clarification if you wish to. So please either raise your hand or put it in the chat box.
So I wanted to go back to the chat and mention that GW had talked about how there are many positions being advertised to help train specialized AI. And I responded and said, yes, that's kind of the people who determine the quality of the training data. I think that one of the memes that circulated very early on was about the use of the word delve. And later, people were saying, oh, if you use delve, you've used ChatGPT. But it actually relates back to who trained the data in those early data sets. And a lot of Nigerians were saying, don't accuse us of using ChatGPT because a lot of the early training data was actually based on people from Nigeria hired to train it. So I think that's kind of what, Kristin, you were talking about, the bias and the quality of training data. So it pinpoints to how a certain set of group of users employed to train data said, okay, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And for them, they were educated based on Shakespearean English. And so to delve into something is very common. They're very proper in their use of English. So ChatGPT would then provide responses that include the word delve because it's the predictable statistical model that delve is one of the common words. So the consequence of that was that anybody who utilized this word as part of their repertoire of language was then accused of being using ChatGPT. So that's kind of what we're concerned about.
Lily, I believe this kind of debate will continue. Whatever technology comes and whatever way it is being developed, it always remains. It is since the inception of computer. Whenever something new innovations have taken place, we always have a lot of apprehensions, and always we have been debating all those issues.
Oh, I think Ramesh, you're frozen.
I think it was you, maybe Kristin, because I could hear him. But yes, I
don't
agree.
see
These
questions in the chat, so I'm gonna.
Yes,
now
somebody is
he is.
asking question or is
Yeah, I don't think there are any questions. So Kristin, do you want to move ahead?
Christian would like to continue because we don't see any question right now. Christian, can you hear me?
I think she's frozen.
Okay. So Lily, do you have her contact number? Would you call her, or maybe she will be joining again?
Yep. If you could just bear with us for a second.
Yes.
Okay. Her computer just kicked her out of Zoom, so please give her a couple of minutes to get back in.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I wanted to go back to Wendy's comments that one of the big jobs are the jobs that are hiring people to fix the code and document AI that did something incorrectly. And I think that is definitely very important. Developers probably are crucial But at the same time, what we've discovered is that we really don't know what these software developers do. Like what Kristin was saying, a lot of these processes are behind the scenes. So we can only guess what this algorithm is built on. And sometimes we don't know, and that's how we need to be careful in using the generated information.
So Lily, Kristin is back.
Yep.
Kristin would like to continue. Are you in
Yes.
position to?
I am. I have no idea what just happened. I hope it does not happen again, but
No, no.
let's keep going from where we're at.
So
So GenAI and the lit review process. Like Megan O'Donnell was saying yesterday, there's not just one literature review process. There are many different ways to conduct a literature review. My favorite at the moment for teaching graduate students about AI facilitated literature review, because they're working on the thesis and dissertation, I have come to really love this Boell and Cecez-Kecmanovic hermeneutic framework for literature review process, consisting of two major hermeneutic circles. I love this diagram because this is very reflective of how I really do literature review. I've seen a lot of literature review models that are like 6 boxes lined up in a row, and it's like search for papers, select the papers that are relevant, read them and develop an argument. And I'm like, that is not my life experience. My life experience is very much more like this one, where you're going around and around in circles, cutting across from one step to another, clear across the circle, and kind of going back and forth and chaotically interpreting and searching and acquiring, all in this nonlinear kind of model. So I love this, and I love teaching this because I feel like this gives a lot of grace to students who say, I just don't know how to do the literature review, or I'm dreading it. This really shows that a less linear but more interactive and more thoughtful process is allowable in academic literature review. So we still have steps that should look familiar to anybody who's familiar with literature review. You're still doing searching, sorting, selecting. Sorry, I shouldn't have clicked. I should have simply done nothing. Searching, sorting, selecting, acquiring papers to read, reading them. This is another thing I like about the Boell and Cecez-Kecmanovic framework, is that they actually do have a block for reading, which a lot of frameworks that I've seen sort of gloss over reading, but in fact it is part of a literature review. You should read the literature review. Identifying, that means identifying concepts and then refining research questions, which leads back into searching. So that's the first hermeneutic circle, which is search and acquisition. And then the larger hermeneutic circle comes out from reading. You start mapping and classifying. This is where the literature reviewer begins to isolate their own ideas about the topic and connect them with the ideas that are presented in the literature. That leads into critical assessment. And that's one of the more challenging aspects of literature review, especially for doctoral students and master's students who may not feel like they have the right to criticize published literature. They may not feel like they have the status to do that. And so this, again, it gives them permission to say, hey, I can critically assess the ideas that are presented in the literature review, in the literature, because I am also a scholar and I am also a researcher. From that critical assessment, it can lead into argument development, which is the crux of the literature review. It can also lead into refining the research problem in questions, or even raising the research problem in questions. So this hermeneutic model, I think, is, and hermeneutic has to do with making meaning from text by engaging with it mentally. So this is kind of the model that I start from when I'm teaching the AI facilitated literature review, because this, unlike some of the more linear models or some of the more systematic models, I think is reflective of what graduate students do, unless they're doing more of a methodological literature review. Looking into the literature review process, there are many products that have been released before 2022 and since 2022 that have this sort of AI brand attached to them and that are specifically designed to assist with scholarly literature review. I'm going to demonstrate Elicit, but I will say that the other tools listed here are potentially in use at your institution, potentially by students. I think I saw on LinkedIn earlier this week that one of the libraries had funded premium licenses of consensus for everyone at their institution. So these tools have been in use for a while. A lot of librarians have looked at them and critiqued them and come up with good ideas for how they might be integrated into a literature review. So these are some of the ones that I think have a little bit more credibility as far as literature review tools. I also have Grammarly logo here. That one has less credibility, but there's a good reason why I put it there, and I'll tell you what that is later on down the road a little bit. It is important to note that these tools, a lot of them are built on a database called Semantic Scholar. Especially, I know Elicit is, I think Litmaps is, and I think Cite is. I don't know what the other ones are. And remember, we talked about open closed. Not all of these products are particularly transparent about where their data sets are coming from. So they will say, oh, we used a specialized data set comprised of only scholarly literature, and that may be true. But all the librarians in this workshop right now are going, wait a second, which data set? Because there's no one data set that consists of every scholarly journal paper ever. They're sort of collected in different places, and each one has its own strengths and weaknesses. Semantic Scholar, the database that we know is under the hood of a couple of these tools, this is a graphic representation of some of the gaps in the training data for that specific database. You can see that there are quite a lot of uncategorized papers. 60 million of the papers in Semantic Scholar haven't been categorized, so we don't know which category they're in. Medicine is pretty well represented with about 31 million papers. Biology, physics and engineering, computer science, chemistry. These are all, have pretty high numbers. The person who compiled this bar chart is my former classmate and colleague in linguistics. She noted that only 1.1 million papers in the Semantic Scholar database have to do with linguistics. So maybe some of these uncategorized could also be linguistics, we don't know. But this bar chart really is important for people to consider when they are deciding whether to use a tool or how much to trust a tool that they use. That tells you, this data set might be biased towards physical sciences. Now, that's not an evil bias, right? It's not an unethical bias, but it is a bias. And so if you're coming from geology or linguistics or philosophy, it's good to know that the results from that tool that uses Semantic Scholars database may simply not reflect the breadth of work in your field. And so you might want to supplement it with another resource. Now, what is the best way to learn how a GenAI tool works? For instance, what's the best way to find out what the underlying database is? Should you prompt the tool to explain itself? Or should you prompt ChatGPT to explain the generative AI algorithm? Should you search Google for an explanation, or should you read the developer's documentation? What's the best way to find out the truth about the AI tool that you're using? It is D, read the developer's documentation. I have seen so many times especially in the last year or two, people saying things like, I prompted ChatGPT to tell me what's in its data set. And here's what it told me. Okay, well, ChatGPT probably searched Google to find that answer and then summarized what Google told it about ChatGPT and then turned that into an answer. If you ask ChatGPT, how does ChatGPT work? It's not gonna confess to you its deepest, darkest, identity truth, because it cannot do that. That's not what it's for. How ChatGPT works is that it goes to its data set, its training data, which is scraped from the World Wide Web, which has correct answers in it as well as incorrect answers, and then it generates something. Developer documentation is written by the developers, and they usually tell you, they may not tell you the whole truth because there may be some trade secrets that they want to protect, but they will tell you true facts about their design and development. And that is a more reliable source of information compared to a Google search or a ChatGPT prompt, or prompting the tool to explain itself. So that obviously is a pet peeve of mine. So try to avoid doing that. Just look at the developer documentation. And then another thing that I would recommend as far as evaluative judgment, and sorry, I think I kind of got off track here. But what I'm talking about with evaluative judgment has to do with this tool. So we talked about evaluating appropriateness based on, is it effective? Is it efficient? And is it ethical? Well, how you would do that is build on the knowledge that you have about the task that you're trying to do with it, about what the tool is and what it's for, how it works and what's under the hood. And then you can also validate it by testing it out yourself. Okay, so you can establish a performance standard. I think a good way to establish a performance standard is to do something yourself, a human-produced example. So if you want to establish a performance standard for a tool that you want to use to summarize a research article, summarize your own research article, because that tells you how well you can do it without AI, and that gives you a performance standard. Now you've got something to compare it to. Then test the AI tool, have it summarize the article, and then you can assess the performance. You can also adjust. So looking at this famous, they call it the Deming cycle, plan, do, study, and act. The act is usually adjust your approach and try to improve your approach. This is totally fair game when you're talking about AI. You don't have to take its first answer. You can iterate, try a different tool, try a different prompt, add a human in the loop, figure out a way to do this to where you're getting results that you can live with, or until you give up and decide to do it without AI, which is also an action that you can take. All right, here's this tool again. I already kind of flipped back to it, so I'm going to skip this slide, but let's try it with Elicit. So let's remember what we're trying to do. We're trying to decide based on empirical testing whether Elicit meets our needs. And this is going to be an individual answer for each person here in the workshop. It's not a yes or no across the board. So what can Elicit do? This is a screenshot from Elicit. It can find relevant papers even if they don't match keywords. That's again, getting at that idea that a generative AI is capable of taking a natural language input rather than a specifically designed search string. It can combine the breadth of semantic similarity with the precision of keyword matching. So it can also do keyword matching. It can read summaries of abstracts specific to your query, customize what you see about a paper, and organize papers by that information. It can filter based on the study type, and it can export your work. These are the claims that Elicit makes about what it can do. So let's try it. Let's see how it does for our purposes. So if you don't already have an account, now's a good time to get one. They are free. And all you need to do is give them an email address. I don't know if you all have a burner email address that you use when you want the spam to go somewhere you're not going to see it, but you will get emails from Elicit about once a week after you sign up for an account. So if you don't like that, you might want to use a burner email address. to sign up for this service. If you continue with GitHub or Google, you're potentially telling those publishers what you're doing. So buyer beware. And if you already have an account, now would be a good time to sign into it because we're going to do a demonstration. I think I'm going to pause for about 5 minutes so that anyone without an account has a chance to sign up for an account. Of course, you don't have to. You can just watch what I do. I'm not trying to get Elicit to get a bunch of accounts. I do like it and think it's neat, but I'm not, trying to become an influencer here. So if you would rather not, please feel fully invited not to sign up for an account at all and just follow along with me. Okay, can you please type in the chat, I need more time, if you need more time to sign up for an account?
Kristin would like to respond to the comments Larry has put in the chat box. In meantime, if you feel that it is.
Okay, so we've tried and tested an AI tool that is invaluable, Google Notebook LM, which allows you to control the sources that the AI uses for answering prompts. Testing it with the ETD guides, but you can also use any sources for free, up to 50 sources. That is very interesting. I have not gotten at all into using Notebook LM. I hear about it all the time from people I follow on social media that really love Notebook LM, but that is not a tool that I have taken the time to test out. So that's really good to know that you've used your ETD documentation as input data and that you're having good results with it. That does make me want to try it. Okay, well, when you get into Elicit, you will see something like this. There are a few different types of functionality that it offers. There's research report, systematic review, and find papers. Let's start with find papers. This is a pretty simple type of prompt, and the output is much more constrained because it should just give you the paper and then give you a few details about the paper. So I'm going to start here with the find papers, and it says like ask a research question to search and explore academic literature. So I can't remember what prompt I gave it. Okay, well, let's just come up with a prompt to give it because I do want to do this demonstration, but you can put your own prompt. So if you're working on a project right now that has a certain topic and you're interested in seeing how Elicit would find papers for that topic, go ahead and enter your own topic. This is a good opportunity for you to personalize the tool and evaluate it for your own purposes. So I'm going to put in a topic that's maybe related to something that I'm interested in, but why don't you go ahead and put in a topic that is more relevant to you? So I'm going to say find research on how to effectively teach copyright to graduate student researchers. This will be my research topic. And it looks like it's got a new feature that I haven't seen before. It's evaluating my prompt strength. This is pretty nice that they added that feature because if you're using the free version of Elicit, they do kind of limit how many prompts you can do. So unlike a chatbot like Copilot or Gemini, with Elicit, if you're using the free version, you don't just get unlimited tries to keep getting better and better results. For that, you would need to pay them, which I am not currently doing. But it's actually giving me some feedback and saying, yeah, that's a good research question. And it's even giving me some recommendations to add elements for better results. And you can see these are very oriented towards what I would consider something like a systematic literature review and something similar to designing a search string for a conventional database search. So they're saying, do you want to limit research design or intervention specificity or how the outcomes are measured? I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to keep my prompt as is because I'm trying to get a feel for, well, what kind of papers is it even going to output? So from here, I'm going to go ahead and click this arrow to enter the prompt and start the process of finding papers. You'll find that Elicit is considerably slower than ChatGPT or Copilot. And the reason for that is because it's doing more steps and they're not all large language model steps. Some of the processing that it's doing is more conventional database. So it did come out with all these papers. I'm going to use this button to toggle the sidebar because I want that to go away. It's blocking the content. So everything here in this table is the output for the find papers prompt. So there's a paper listed on the left and then an abstract summary listed on the right. This abstract summary is obviously much smaller than the abstract. I'm thinking that they probably pulled the abstract from the paper or from the page where the paper was posted, and then the abstract, which is already a summary, they summarized it even more and brought it down to like one sentence. So it's pulling up all of these papers, and it looks like some of them it's providing a DOI or a durable link to where that paper can be found. So if you wanted to see the actual paper that it was drawing from, you could click that link and it would use the browser to open a tab where you could find that actual paper. This is different from what you would see if you put that prompt into something like Copilot or ChatGPT. It's much more structured, and you're getting a lot more sources. These should all be scholarly sources, so it's not going to be sending you out to a website, which ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini would definitely send you to a website if you put this prompt into there. And then it's also just taking a very scholarly way of presenting the information. So they're giving you the citation information. This looks a lot like what you might see if you searched in Web of Science or Scopus. You're seeing like the title, the author list, the year it was published. So it's doing a lot of the same things that a traditional like digital database would do, but it's doing something a little bit different here in the abstract summary, where it's actually generating novel content that isn't in the original publication. So it's got an abstract summary. Now let's open back up that sidebar that I turned off because it was distracting me. It's offering me the chance to manage columns, so you can search or create a column. Now, if you were doing a systematic literature review, you would want to ask the same question about all the papers in your list, because you would want to know which ones of these used a certain methodology, or which ones of these had a sample size above 100, specimens or participants, which ones of these were conducted in an international context. You want to be able to sort in a systematic literature review. This is a little bit less relevant in the Boell and Cecez-Kecmanovic type of literature review, which again emphasizes reading. So this tool, Elicit, is much more designed for somebody who's doing a systematic literature review, but I think it's still useful for somebody who's doing more of an unstructured or hermeneutic literature review. So let's go ahead and add a column, and let's say I want to see the main findings. And again, it's going a lot slower than Copilot would. It's doing a lot more steps than Copilot would. It's not just trying to answer the question. It's actually going in and trying to source the content of a specific article and then process that information and present it in a way that makes sense under this prompt, which is main findings. And understanding all of that, I hope that you all feel at least a little bit impressed with the fact that it was able to do that in like under 30 seconds. Understanding that, yes, these tools have serious limitations in terms of accuracy and serious limitations in terms of bias. Nonetheless, this is a lot faster than you could ever do it using a database, especially if you're a novice who may not be all that good at searching. And so I think this is very helpful to students to let them know this is kind of a way in to using Elicit, a way into approaching the beginning stage of a literature review, because you can get a feel for what's out there, and you can start to understand what kinds of information can be found in this research article, and maybe even a little bit of what the literature is saying related to your question. So I don't want to read any of this. I don't care what the AI thinks. I'm actually not doing a literature review on this topic, so I'm just skimming past the actual responses, but showing you the form of responses that this tool gives and critically evaluating them in the context of, well, what else might a student have access to? what else might a student see or experience while they're doing a literature review as a graduate student, using conventional tools or, their own devices. I think that Elicit is a very useful way of presenting how scholarly literature is used in literature review and scholarship. It gives you a lot of guidance on what kinds of things would go into conducting a literature review. Even if the student doesn't actually look at what's in the table itself is also teaching. Now, in the workshop, I do encourage them to add columns like the purpose or thesis of each paper that it found, the paradigm or theoretical lens that was used, and the major findings. If that's of interest to you, sorry, I didn't mean to skip slides here. If that's of interest to you, go ahead and try that. Every column you add costs you some of your free credits. So if you want to do something else with your free credits, you can skip that step 3. And then another important thing to note with Elicit, and I do emphasize this with the graduate students, is that you can upload your own PDFs and extract data from them. So remember, we talked about how the Semantic Scholar database that underlies Elicit's search is very biased toward like medical and natural science papers, and less representative of things like linguistics, philosophy, social sciences. That limitation can to some extent be overcome if you just upload your own PDFs. Now, I know there's people right now going, but what about the privacy and what about the copyright of those PDFs? Elicit says right in their documentation that the PDFs that you upload do not get sent to a training tool. So Elicit has basically their own large language model. They're not training that large language model based on PDFs that users upload. They state that explicitly in their documentation. And that's where I would always say, refer to the documentation that the developer provides, because if you're just speculating or you're just basing it on what you know generally about LLMs, that user inputs are used for training, you may not be accurately evaluating the tool that you're using. In this case, Elicit has stated in their user agreement that it is not going to use the PDF that you upload to train its large language model. If they do that, they would be in breach of contract. So there is some accountability there because it's in their documentation. This is why I really encourage using the documentation that developers provide, rather than relying on questions that you might ask to Google or ChatGPT to understand how large language models work. Each one is different. Each tool is its own tool, and if they're meant for users, consumers to use, they should have clear documentation. If the documentation doesn't answer your question, that might be the answer. You can't know that it's going to be ethical with your data if they don't tell you what they're doing with your data. Okay, now let's take a crack at evaluative judgment. So I'm going to give you an activity to evaluate and critique the output of that Find Papers feature of Elicit. And we're going to evaluate the output in terms of its accuracy, comprehensiveness, relevance, and bias. So the link here goes to a Miro board. The alignment scale that we're going to use for voting is on the second frame of the Miro board. And we can add this link to the chat so that you can just click over to the Miro board. And then I'm going to share screen and see what you all are voting on. So I think that the Miro board is going to go straight to the first frame, which I'm sorry, but we did not do that activity. So I'm sorry for skipping it. I meant to do it, but I think that is past now. So let me share my screen. and I'll get you the link to the Miro board in the chat, and then you can start voting to evaluate how Elicit did. Okay, actually Lily has posted the link to the Miro board, so that's ready to go. So everybody go to the Miro board. Now, if you haven't used a Miro board, it's pretty intuitive, but not totally intuitive. So just like say something if you need help using it, and I will try to help you. But everybody should have the ability to vote on these four, I don't even know what you call them, scales. And we'll just see how you like the accuracy, comprehensiveness, relevance, and bias from what you experience. You can just click your little face circle to put your vote somewhere on the scale. And then if you do have a comment, the sticky stack here works by click and drag on the sticky, and then you can type your comment in it. So you can just kind of click and drag and say, you know, here's what I think. Don't try to type when people are watching. So you can type your comments in the comments, or you can make a sticky on the Miro board, and I will see them either way. Okay, good. It looks like people are able to vote and getting to the Miro board and voting. So this is positive. We also had good experience with the Miro interface and the workshop that we gave to our students. So if you take nothing else away from this AI facilitated lit review workshop, you might want to take Miro. It's quite a fun tool if you're giving a presentation. And I think they have some AI functionality, but honestly, it's not an AI tool. GW, where is the stuff to evaluate? That stuff would be in Elicit. So if you did the Elicit activity, then you would be evaluating the output for your prompt. Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't give everybody enough time. And I also I talked the whole time and didn't give you any time to read. So let's take 5 minutes to read. We've got actually plenty of time left in the workshop. So let's do 5 minutes to read the Elicit output, play with Elicit, and then come back to the Miro board and vote on the second frame of the Miro board. Okay, I think it's been about 5 minutes, and if you still want to vote, please feel welcome to. I do kind of keep these Miro boards and I look at them to try to figure out where people are at. The majority of folks who responded to the Miro board survey put the accuracy a little bit more to the accurate side compared to the middle, so it wasn't a true neutral. Nobody put it far in the green of extremely accurate, far to the right. Of course, it's not going to be bang on accurate because it is a summary. Again, you might want to think about it as not, did it tell me exactly what this article contains, so much as did it summarize it as well as, less well, or better than I would have summarized it. I'm also, not the best summarizer. I tend to read fast, and let's be honest, I tend to skim. So a lot of times my summaries do miss key points, just like Elicit. So that's a limitation of my own self as a reader. I still think I tend to be more accurate than the AI, and I have published a paper showing that that's what I think. So I personally would put it right around where the majority of you all did, which is in the yellow. We do have one who's closer to the left side saying it's not accurate. And the more familiar you are with your topic, the more you'll be able to exercise evaluative judgment about the accuracy. So if you know a lot about what you're writing or about what you're asking it to summarize, then you can come back and say, this is actually not accurate. And that tells you something about whether you should be using the tool. Comprehensiveness, we've got more of a mixed bag here. We've got some who are saying it's not comprehensive at all. If you answered not comprehensive at all, maybe you could unmute your microphone quickly or type into our Zoom chat what discipline you're in, because I think that I have a hypothesis about Elicit that it's more comprehensive, even to the tune of, extremely or very comprehensive for some disciplines, and then not comprehensive at all for others. Relevance, that would be relevant to your prompt. So it looked like most of you did find it relevant. It was noticing what you put in and whatever results it gave back to you related to that prompt. So it is good at that. That's been my experience. Every time I've run this workshop, I've noted that, yeah, it's not giving me off the wall papers. The papers seem to be related to the prompt that I input, and that's, I find that pretty impressive, even though I don't always compare it to something else like Scopus or Web of Science or even Google Scholar. So I haven't done that much of an evaluation that I'm like comparing multiple tools to see which one is the best at relevance. And then if the output was biased, to what extent did that bias distort the intended meaning? I realize you all did not have very much time to engage with the output. And somebody wrote that on their sticky. They didn't have enough time. Well, we didn't have very much time. It was only about 5 minutes that we were engaging in this activity. So yeah, in a real working process, you wouldn't want to try to rush through it and take 5 minutes to evaluate the outputs if it was something high stakes like a paper or a literature review. And then one person also wrote, it gave me thematic findings. I used the report feature. Yeah, it's real easy to get confused in Elicit, and they're constantly changing their design. That's probably the thing I like the least about Elicit's interface, is that these buttons are not stable. So the features that it actually offers are not stable. And one of the activities for today's workshop, we're going to have to sort of fudge a little bit because my demo is going to be a different feature from yours. The one I used has been actually discontinued since I created the demo, but it's not going to stop us from evaluating the tool. So yeah, the report feature is quite an interesting feature that we can talk about here in a little bit. But the key takeaway is that you can share with your students this activity of going through the process of testing something and then critically evaluating it based on the values that matter in academic research, which is things like accuracy, comprehensiveness, relevance, and bias. Those are the criteria that their literature review will also be judged on. So you're teaching them how to use an AI tool, but you're also teaching them how to do a literature review and what counts as a good literature review. So whether they end up using Elicit or abandoning it, this workshop, I think what I hoped for it was that it would just kind of give them the chance to understand what matters in literature review. And with that in mind, understanding that we've got a specific task that we're trying to do, which is search and acquisition of literature, and we've tested it and we've sort of evaluated those 4 criteria. Let's go to the next frame on Miro and do a higher level evaluation of the appropriateness based on effectiveness, efficiency, and ethicality. For this, you'll just go to the next frame on Miro. Sorry for slipping you back and forth, but we can get there. The next frame has dot voting. So similar to the sticky notes, you can just take a dot, click and drag it, and put it wherever, oh, I'm presenting, so I can't edit. Put it wherever you want that vote to go. So for each row, you can vote which column you would put this functionality. So the find papers, would you say AI enabled because it's more capable than the human? Researcher plus AI if it's only capable of sub-processes, or would you say it's not capable and I don't think it's going to be effective for finding papers in my use case? And then just let go of the dot whenever you've voted. I'm going to delete that dot because I don't want my vote to count in this. And then it says here, I'm sorry for that being blocked, but it says color is not significant. You can pick your favorite color when you go to vote. So I think that I forgot to share my screen, actually, and I apologize for that. Let's go back and share screen here and go to the Miro. All right, so I see a vote. So even though I had failed to share my screen, somebody was able to vote. If you are confused by what I was saying when I didn't have my screen shared, please speak up. I don't want anyone to be confused about the Miro. This is the 3rd frame of the Miro. So if you're lost, just use the Miro interface and you can zoom way out and then point your mouse at the 3rd frame and zoom way back in, or you can use this frame here down on the bottom right. There's a little icon that looks like a frame. And if you click that, you can pick which frame you want to focus on and just click on the 3rd one and it'll zoom in. I'm going to go back to presentation mode now, but hopefully that'll help you find where it's at. Okay, I'm seeing more visitors cursors on frame 3, so I think you all are finding it. And I also understand that just like me, you all are going back and forth from Zoom to browser. So I want to be patient and understanding that, yeah, you all are also trying to do many things at once. Let's take 3 minutes. Let's take about, yeah, till 12:50 for the voting. And that'll be about 3 minutes for voting.
Kristin, I'm not sure we're able to vote for some reason. I can't select my dot to put on it. What's going on?
Are you clicking and dragging the dot?
Okay, got it.
Okay.
And I want to bring up John's comment earlier. I think he was responding to like why he voted on the left side of comprehensiveness. And it was because he was searching for studies related to library programming. Does that tie in with your hypothesis?
It does. So I would have to kind of go back and look at Kim Becker's bar chart about what disciplines are represented in the Semantic Scholar. But by and large, my interpretation of that is that the disciplines that are well represented tend to be natural physical sciences, especially biomedical. And the ones that are less well represented tend to be in the social sciences and education. So it's kind of a bummer. And I believe that what is behind that is probably economic reasons. I think Semantic Scholar is open source. And so unless the like databases like Elsevier start developing their own versions of Elicit, which I don't know why they wouldn't. I don't know that they are, but that's what I would do if I were them. That has access to more literature from a broader range of disciplines, then, we're stuck with these startups like Elicit that have access to the most available at the cheapest price, which is going to be like open access, publicly funded research in, probably medicine and health. It's not necessarily bad or good, but it just means that the people in those less represented disciplines are going to be maybe not getting as good results from the AI tools. Seeing a lot of votes pop up in the researcher plus AI on all three rows. This is, I think, pretty reflective of what I've seen with the graduate students too. They do tend to fall closer to the middle. They seem enthusiastic to experiment with AI. That's probably a sampling issue where only people who are interested in using AI would sign up for this workshop. People who are less interested or don't think it's useful, they might simply skip the workshop. But you don't see a lot of AI enabled. I haven't really seen students come through and say, yeah, this is a great tool and I trust it completely. And this is going to make my lit review a breeze. They still want to be in charge of the literature review. They still want to read the papers and take control of the information finding within the papers. They don't trust it entirely. But I think that you seem to be on a similar page with the students that I've run this workshop with, that it has its uses and it's something that you might be ready to integrate into your process with oversight. So the reading and identifying, if you're using AI, it's important to know that, especially as a graduate student, disclosure of use may be expected or required. Even though our graduate college does not require disclosure for thesis and dissertations, the committee might require it. And journals that you're submitting your research to also might require it. So before you get too far down the road, think through the implications of using AI and whether that's something that you would be ready to disclose if it were expected or required. When you do disclose, you should show that the use was effective and ethical. Basically, you're trying to show that your use didn't diminish the quality of your research, that you used it in a way that either enhanced the quality or didn't negatively impact it. You can draw language for your disclosure from this workshop using the specific evaluative criteria that were presented using the 3E framework. And especially for graduate students, and even more especially if they're using AI to generate data. There's many graduate students at Iowa State who study AI and its effectiveness, and so they might be expected to validate it. They certainly would be expected to validate it. That's part of the research process. Now let's switch gears into mapping and classifying, which is the stage that sort of comes after reading in the framework, where after you sort of read through the paper or the set of papers, you try to start synthesizing them, understanding what kinds of concepts you're seeing and how they fit together. There used to be a feature on Elicit called lists of concepts. I think this has now been replaced by the research article feature. So we're going to test this out. And we're going to use, instead of this prompt, we're going to use the research article prompt. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I don't know if I actually have enough credits to do a research article, but I'll show you the prompt and then I'll show you the list of concepts, which I think is a similar functionality, but it's just more advanced in the research article tool. So going back to Elicit, you can click the Elicit icon here in the top left to get back to the home screen, and then you can open up the research report function here. And it still says ask a research question. I think it is useful here to be more precise than the find papers, because you're not just naming a topic. You want to be precise enough that you are like in some way guiding it to just give you a certain kind of research article. So the way that I've coached this in the past is like a topic plus a question about the topic, to just be, and it's saying here, ask a research question to generate a structured research report. That's how you generate structure, by narrowing the prompt to not just the topic, which you would do for something like find papers, but also some kind of a question about the topic. So you might say like teaching interventions that effectively illustrate the concept of fair use, sticking with the copyright idea. So here I've got the topic, which is fair use. And then I'm also being a little bit more precise, saying I only care about interventions. So I only want the results of this prompt to have something to do with interventions and the effectiveness of the interventions. These research reports cost more of the free credits than papers. So again, if you're using the free tool, and I always assume that graduate students are using the free tool, then be very conscious about how you craft your prompt, because you're not going to want to waste your free sample on something that's not going to work very well. Let's go back to my list of concepts. I think I have it in a notebook. That was the find papers. Sorry, guys, I should not be sharing my screen if I don't know where I'm going. Where's the list of concepts? Well, I'm searching for my list
going
of...
back, there's one that's called the review.
That might be the list of concepts.
Yeah. And I also posted my sample research report link in the chat. It does take a little while for anyone in this room here who's trying to populate this. So while your prompt is running and you want to see examples on the screen or click on my sample report, you'll see how it's got thematic findings and so forth.
Yeah, and the thematic findings, I think that Elicit has actually completely changed the form of this prompt, because when I did this back in March, they didn't have all of these features showing. So together we have learned today that it's going to keep regenerating your report whenever you log in to look at it, which is kind of cool if you think about if you're studying a hot topic that's changing very frequently. It's good to know that you can continuously return to that notebook, and it'll update for you. But it's also annoying if you're running a workshop on it, because then you have no idea what you're looking at when you go to show it to the people in the workshop. So it's kind of an awkward scenario for a workshop leader to have this. So, all right, how can I get out of this slideshow? What I have noted about the more complex and the more sophisticated features of Elicit is that they generate a boatload of text. These sort of research reports that they generate are so lengthy, and they do look very academic. They've got, citations, and they've got synthesis paragraphs. This one's got some endnotes that you can link to. They've got tables. It's presented in form very much like a journal article or a research article, which to me raises the question of, is this more efficient than just reading an actual research article? This is what I kind of always come back to with Elicit's research report feature is, like, for me, why would I read through all this text if my goal is to be more efficient and save time on reading through a bunch of long research article texts? I find this feature very confusing. But when you get to the thematic report, you can start to see how that would be relevant if you were trying to do mapping and classifying. That's what Elicit is doing. It's going through a bunch of sources and pulling key themes. And then, like you can see here, it's saying these two papers both hit the same theme. Allen, 2011, and Burrow, 2014, both highlighted risks of antibiotic use. So this is starting to do that mapping and classifying. Of these papers, what do they have in common? What are multiple papers both doing? It's also something that can be challenging for novice scholars. When I was a novice scholar, I saved this article that was all about how to write up your literature review. And I'll never forget it. The author was like, don't do a laundry list literature review, which is where you list each paper you read and then say one thing about each paper. It's not what scholars are trying to do with a literature review. They're trying to synthesize. So all of these papers highlighted something, and all of those papers contrasted it with something else. And here's what you can take away from those. And that kind of argumentative synthesis is very challenging for novice scholars, because it just takes quite a lot of interpretation, especially when, as probably everyone here knows, a lot of these authors are using their own terms and their own background knowledge. a lot of times they're looking at different kinds of research subjects. And so to synthesize those kinds of claims into a single argument it takes a lot of brain power. Elicit is claiming to do that in a matter of seconds. So let's go to the next Miro slide, and let's do a little bit of starting to evaluate. So this is frame 4 on the Miro board. I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting. And if you go into Zoom where I'm sharing screen, I'll go back and demonstrate again how to get to a specific slide. So down here on the bottom right, you've got a button that says frames, and that pulls up a menu of all the frames in the presentation. So we're going to head over to frame 4. And this is perhaps less easy to do with the research report functionality. And I apologize for that because I didn't realize that we were no longer able to access the list of concepts tool in Elicit. But I still think it's worth kind of doing this evaluative exercise of figuring out how many sources did Elicit use to generate that research report. What's a rough date range? So obviously not all of them are going to fall into the same 5-year range, but roughly what date range do most of the sources come from that Elicit was referring to? And then back to that thematic analysis, how many citations does it give per concept? And then the last evaluation that you can do is another one of these voting scales. How familiar are you with the journals that the sources come from? So let's do 7 minutes. Let's go to 110, and you can skim through the research report that Elicit gave you for your prompt and think about how many sources it seems to be citing, the date range for those sources, how many citations it's giving for each theme or each concept, and then look at the journals that the sources it's drawing are coming from and decide. You can vote on how familiar you are with those journals. And I'll just wait for a few minutes while you all do that task.
So Kristin, another 10 minutes to finish.
Then you're muted.
Yeah, I guess let's just do this until 110, and then I'll go finish the slideshow, which is very nearly at the end, and that should leave us about 15 minutes for Q&A.
And like I mentioned earlier, it does take a little while to generate the report. And if yours hasn't generated, feel free to go to the link and click on My Sample Research Report. You can take a look at their methodology in searching based on what I asked them to search, the number of papers, their sources, and so forth. And then you can analyze how useful the thematic information is.
Thank you for posting that, Lily. I didn't realize how slow it was going to go with the research report. So I'm seeing some votes, and there's actually kind of a range going on here. And you'll see as you use Elicit that it continues to build out over time. So this is a pretty complex operation that it's trying to do. And the large language models in the background are probably looking at very long articles to draw the input. I mentioned earlier the concept of a context window when we were talking about how a chatbot will look at the whole conversation, not just the last input. Well, the more text in the context window, the more processing power it takes a large language model. So you can imagine if it's looking at a 10-page research article, that's taking a lot of computational power. This is why Elicit doesn't give you much of a free sample, because the kinds of things that it's trying to do are very resource intensive for a computer. Even though the computer can do it faster than we ever could, it's still having to process a ton of information, and it just takes time. So yeah, the comment, the GenAI prompt only pulled from 23 to 25, 2023 to 2025, since it's a recent issue. Yeah, that makes sense that it wouldn't have a lot of sources from back in 2006 if it's something that nobody was writing about back then. But you might also see that it's got a narrow date range just because it's not done yet. And a lot of times the more complex functions like research report will continuously update over several minutes or maybe even a few days. And then I see another sticky here at, for citations per concept. It seems to say they will use 10. I wonder if that is always the case. It's impossible not to speculate about what's going on in the code. Did some programmer tell it to find 10 papers and then stop? Well, it's possible, especially if you start seeing a pattern where it's like, oh, every theme has exactly 10 citations and no more. But that's not how a real systematic literature review would work, right? In a real systematic literature review, you would want to keep going until you reach saturation, not until you get to some arbitrary number. So these are the kinds of questions that I get students to think about, not because there's a right answer. You know, it's not like you have to have a range from before 2006 to 2025 for it to be a good literature review. But if you start to notice that there's a narrow date range, just like the person who wrote this sticky said, like, start to speculate about why. Why did you only see papers from 2023 to 2025? Well, because there weren't any before that. Okay, that makes sense. But if you know it's a topic that does have a longer history, that might be a signal to you that the data set that it's drawing from may be incomplete. So again, let's go to the next frame here, the final frame in the Miro, where you would, again, just use the 3E framework, the effective, efficient, ethical, appropriateness evaluation tool, to make up your mind about whether you would use a tool like Elicit to do the task of mapping and classifying based on the experience that you just had. So if you can skip to the next frame in the Miro, go ahead and place your vote. And I'm going to stop sharing the Miro, but I will go back to the vote. But I want to make sure that we have time for 15 minutes of Q&A. So I'll get to the end of the slides here and share those while you all are voting on the last activity, whether that's appropriate. So for mapping and classifying, the key takeaways and conclusions for that activity of using either research report or list of concepts to do the literature review step of mapping and classifying is that for literature review generally, it is critical to triangulate sources. One database or index has never been considered sufficient for a literature review, and that continues now. It doesn't change just because there's AI in the loop. You would always have needed to look at more than one database or index, and you still do. So just because you've done this step in Elicit, that doesn't mean that you're done searching the literature review. And then secondly, I don't know if there's any scholars active right now who would dispute that an AI-based interpretation or synthesis should be verified by the researcher. Even more so if you're talking about a graduate thesis or dissertation. Unlike research articles where you could argue that it may not matter whether the author of the research article learned anything. What matters with a research article is that the knowledge is available for other people to learn. But if you're talking about a thesis or dissertation, that overlaps with the idea of coursework, where it's not just about putting the research out into the world for others to learn from. It's also an assessment of a student learner and whether they know anything. So they need to, a graduate student working on a thesis or dissertation literature review needs to be able to verify any interpretation or synthesis because their learning is what is being assessed when they do a thesis or dissertation. So that last point is something that I drive home very clearly in this workshop when I'm giving it to graduate students. The last slide has the citations for this slideshow. So if you saw a citation that you're interested in, those are available on the slide, and the slides will be made available on the USETDA archive. So those will all be something that you can go and access. And that's the end of the presentation and the end of the activities. So we actually do have about 13 minutes for Q&A. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Kristin.
And
Thank you, Lily. Yes, Lily, you want to say something?
yes, I would say if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. But Kristin, I do want to highlight something, and I want you to kind of respond to this question. What we've done today with the workshop is demonstrating how Elicit does the search for us, does the classifying for us, and so forth. We have not actually gone to the functionality where assuming a graduate student has done its search elsewhere with the regular methods and then upload their own PDFs and only utilize the functionality of Elicit to kind of organize their information. Would you speak a little bit about that?
So what we've done in past iterations of the workshop is instruct students to come to the workshop with PDFs in hand, and then we show them how to upload their PDFs to the Elicit library. That's why I kind of hit on that point of it's not going to steal the PDF information and use it for training. It says so right there in their documentation. But that is another way that the students can use to overcome the limitation of the Semantic Scholar database. They can pull PDFs from searches they've done on other databases and then upload them to Elicit and use that table that we saw in the Find Papers activity. That table will also be generated for PDFs that users upload. So that's another option that they can do. I don't think you can do the report from papers that you upload. I've never tried it, but I don't think you can. I think the report can only be sourced from their database. But at least the Find Papers, research table, that can be generated for papers that they upload. So that's kind of, a way to integrate a human in the loop. The human does the search, but the AI does the information extraction.
And then another comment I wanted to bring from the Miro board. Somebody had put a sticky earlier saying that, yeah, it's not great because I'm only limited to 2 columns. And of course, that's
Yep.
talking about the free version. So can you also respond to that point?
So yeah, you are limited to 2 columns on the free version, and Elicit isn't very cheap. I think it's $10 a month for the lowest level of premium. I mean, it's not prohibitive. Graduate students usually don't have a second income, so I don't recommend that they spend $10 a month. What I do recommend is that they make their own Elicit by basically prompting a free tool like ChatGPT to look at the PDF that they provide and then give output for each table column. Because you can kind of do that on an unlimited basis and get the outputs. Now, of course, with that, you don't get that security that ChatGPT might not take the input and use it to train its algorithm. So, I don't know. You have to make sure that students understand these security risks and that, there might be an ethical reason not to do that if it's prohibited by a agreement that your library has with some publisher. It's hard for students to anticipate that, but you can teach them about it. And then you can also, like, our university pays for premium Copilot, Microsoft Copilot. Well, that is the GPT tool inside of a Microsoft sort of walled garden that doesn't take user input to train the algorithm. Not every university has that. So if your university is paying for Copilot, I would certainly recommend that students use that if they want to do like a DIY Elicit.
Thank you.
But yeah, there's workarounds, or they can just pay the $10.
So thank you, Kristin. Let's give floor to our participants. If anybody has any questions or clarification or suggestions to make, please raise your hand or put your question or clarification in chat box.
Yeah, I see GW has posted something and he says our business librarian wrote a summary review page about Elicit, and it's a nice summary there. There's also a comparison of how Elicit AI differs from other chatbots.
Anyone else? Please feel free to raise hand and you can unmute and can ask question, or you can put it in the chat box.
And John says, user beware, absolutely. And I think that's what we discovered, that you cannot separate the concept of using AI for literature review or research from general AI literacy. So it's got to be a 2-step process, which is why our workshop has to come in 2 parts.
Thanks, GW. Thanks, Larry.
So we are having about 7 minutes. Anything else or? So I think it's time to conclude because I don't see any question or any clarification coming from audience. So let me take this opportunity on behalf of USETDA and NDLTD to express my sincere thanks to both Kristin and Lily. Definitely, you have made presentation so crystal clear that I'm sure every participant must have benefited, and I'm sure like here time was limited to all kind of practice, but definitely people may like to use it further. My only like I agree with you on that. Whatever you use AI or any technology, ultimately researcher has to have the final say, because whatever contents are generated through any technology, it can't replace human intelligence, because artificial intelligence is a human creation. So always we have to remember that there is no harm in using artificial intelligence, but definitely human involvement is always required. These things are making our job very easier, making fast, making quick. But also, I strongly believe that the way we have been using all these technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, somewhere some kind of training part has increased. It is now it's a responsibility of both teachers and the librarians to make student well aware that what exactly is to be used and what not to be used, because both things are very, very important. Uh, if 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 they are not exactly aware what is the guide, what is the limit, what is the thin line where they have to understand that they may use artificial intelligence for literature review, but they need to understand that when they are writing a research report or thesis or article, what they can use and how they can use, and ultimately writing in on their own words is something very, very important. So I'm sure like this use of technology is definitely making our job more faster, more quicker, but at the same time putting a lot of challenges. And as done in the past, libraries are always prepared in helping our users, and both our research departments are capable of handling these kind of complexity. And I'm sure every participant has benefited from this discussion. So once again, thank you very much to both of you. And your presentation is already available. So please give a big hand to all both our speakers. And now we will break for about 30 minutes. Our next session will be plenary 2, which will be starting at 2 p.m. So I'm sure like you have some little break, because having 2.5 hours on a virtual session is real challenge, and just relax and enjoy and get prepared for the next session. Thank you very much, and see you in the next session. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.